The new mayor in the city of Tshwane, the DA's Randall Williams, says he's going to stop the city from providing free lunches for people who are in meetings or who work in the council. But it appears to mean that the caterers who provide the meals now are without that income. The mayor's acting chief of staff is Griffiths. Jordan, good afternoon to you. Why have you cancelled lunch?
Good afternoon, Stephen. Thank you for having me on the show. So fundamentally, the reason behind this sort of extreme cost cutting relates to the fact that at the end of June 2020, we found that in the DA retake in the city of Tshwane, there was a budget deficit of 4.4 billion rand in place. And so at the moment, there is an extreme need for the city to save as much money as possible. Unfortunately, the DA, when they were unlawfully removed, when council was dissolved in March, the DA left the city with a surplus of 297 million rand. Within a space of 3 months, the ANC administrators who were deployed to the city blew through this and were unable to stabilize revenue collections and exceeded the expenditure that they should have spent, incurring a deficit of 4.4 billion. So at the moment, we're trying to make as many cuts as possible. So in recent opening remarks, the executive mayor, Randall Williams, has indicated that going forward, easy matters where we can cut spending, things like catering, consumables, printing, stationery. As far as possible, we have to implement our cost containment policy in the city to try and keep these costs to a bare minimal. And so this is critical because in many cases they are not key necessities in order for the city to function. And already we've seen much of this being implemented. The mayoral committee meetings, which can often meet for a whole day, with officials presenting. These meetings, no lunch is being provided. And at the moment, we aren't even purchasing bottles of water. We've got colleagues have been advised that they must bring their own bottles of water and they must refill their bottles of water. So we really are taking the need for cost cutting seriously so we can preserve and save the city's fiscus.
Okay, just to be very clear, who got these lunches? I mean, who was actually who was eating the lunch that was being provided?
So in many cases, departments around the city would have had catering budgets, and these budgets were often used to, for instance, if there were long meetings, so for council, which can often run for an entire day, so councillors themselves, for a time, the actual portfolio committee meetings, during under the administrators with the ANC, their long meetings as well. So we'd also, obviously, if there was long engagements in the city of Tshwane council chambers, where departments were hosting stakeholders or engaging with stakeholders to facilitate workshops, they perhaps provide lunch. And so, this was an endemic sort of part of the spending in the city. And, after evaluating it, it's clear that it really is unnecessary and needs to stop as a matter of urgency.
Okay, there's some reports that some of the people who got these lunch were in fact homeless people. This might have started during the pandemic. Is that true?
So, yeah, I think there's a fundamental difference between catering in the city of Tshwane, which caters towards particular needs, which relates to events and marketing, and the provision of food parcels, which is also very different. So I'm not too sure what those reports relate to. But indeed, I mean, obviously the city provides support to the vulnerable. We have a food bank, which provides sort of support packages. And so the intention for us is to obviously manage the internal costs and spending that pertains to internal city working and meetings. But in no way has this compromised the work of the food bank.
Okay, do you know how much money it'll actually save? I mean, how much money was actually being spent on this food?
Yeah, so at the moment I can't give you an exact figure because we're obviously still consolidating these different cost centers and appropriating these funds as they go, as the decision was quite recent. But for instance, in the office of the executive mayor, we're anticipating that in what was budgeted for this year by the ANC administrators, there's maybe approximately 1 million rand, for instance, just in our department, that we can save and appropriate, and we intend to use that to facilitate new grant programs. So that's just in one department, and there obviously are numerous departments in the city. So, we're not talking hundreds of millions, but indeed we're talking a few million, possibly tens of millions that we could save just on, cutting down purchases in catering, as I said, consumables, printing, stationery, these sort of key requirements, cartridges. If we go online and digital a bit more, we can really make a lot of significant savings and redirect those funds not only manage the budget, but also to direct it towards core service delivery.
Then the contracts with the caterers. Now, the concern here, of course, is that the city of Tshwane, I'm not sure who would have been governing it at the time, but the city of Tshwane would have actually signed long-term contracts with these caterers. What happens to those?
So, indeed, the city has sort of a procurement ways in which it procures food with various caterers, and that's obviously on an ad hoc basis, as and when, so it will really depend on whether or not there's a need for the provision of this service. So at the moment, that is then totally restricted. So now, those service providers will either have to try and look for, support in the private sector. But, as the executive mayor has indicated, we don't want to operate in an environment where businesses build their business model around the city of Tshwane, because right now the city of Tshwane has to fundamentally change its business model in order for the city to be financially sustainable in the future. And so we need to figure out a way in which we focus on our core business.
Are you expecting, some people who work for catering companies, could they lose their income as a result?
I am skeptical of that, particularly in the notion that I think in many cases what we have spent on catering, in terms of my assessment of the budgets historically, seems to be grossly overflated at times. So I am also somewhat skeptical of that kind of impact. But indeed, we obviously want to mitigate job losses. But the core business of the city must continue. We need to save that money, and we need to redirect it towards doing the kind of things like filling potholes, fixing traffic lights, and making sure that the city is responsive. We can't try and act as the bastion and catch-all for all types of businesses in the city. It will just sabotage our financial recovery in the long run.
Jordan, you made the point, and you've suggested, and I've seen the press releases from your administration in Tshwane, that the ANC administrator in Nawe, it was led by he who works for the Gauteng provincial government, so the Gauteng provincial government intervened, they took the province into administration, there are several court cases, it's now back under your governance, that they went through all of this money, they left the city 4 billion rand in debt. Their response to that accusation has been that that money went because of COVID-19. The money was spent on relief, but at the same time, and we do know this, that metros in Gauteng lost a huge amount of revenue because of COVID-19. Isn't that the case? Some of what you say must be entirely justified. Metros in Gauteng battled during COVID-19.
So, we must understand context here, Griffiths. Indeed, COVID-19 had an impact on the revenue collection in the city, which the administrators at the time should have been well prepared for. But let's just talk the hard numbers. At the end of March 2020, there was a surplus of 297 million rand in the city's coffers. By the end of June, there was a deficit of 4.4 billion rand. Now, this is in the space of 3 months. So there is no justification or defense for the level of incompetence that was on display in those 3 months in terms of the city's financial management and the callousness and general laissez-faire approach, which was approached to the city's finances. Revenue collections dropped. Expenditure did not decrease. In fact, it increased significantly in some cases as money was being spent. And essentially, zero effort was made to stabilize the city's finances. So indeed, COVID-19 had an impact. But to use that to justify incurring a 4.4 billion rand deficit is truly the height of incompetence.
Jordan Griffiths, I look forward to the response from Nawe to that. Thanks very much indeed. The acting Chief of Staff for the Mayor of Tshwane, Randall Williams.